Hello and welcome to the Friday, April 30th, 2021 edition of On Iowa Politics. This week, 100 days and the census says. Hi, I'm James Lynch of the Cedar Rapids Gazette. With me today are Amie Rivers of the Waterloo-Cedar Falls Courier. Good morning, Amie.
Good morning, James.
Erin Murphy, Lee Newspaper Statehouse Bureau Chief. Good morning, Erin.
Good morning.
You can find us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to On Iowa Politics wherever you find your podcast. First up today, 100 days. 100 days into his administration, President Joe Biden is being compared to FDR and LBJ. Makes me wonder if he'll start going as JRB because of his range of policy and spending proposals that would transform the scope of the federal government in so many ways. Reaction to the president's 100-day speech to Congress predictably fell along party and ideological lines. Socialism cried the right, while the most woke progressives dinged Biden for not going far enough fast. Say what Republicans will about the heavy hand of government and the more fluff and free stuff, it appears that rather than do one thing at a time, Biden is going all in on his whole agenda. Call it ambitious, call it costly, call it crazy, but if nothing else, it's making Republicans crazy. Is that part of the strategy, Erin? He's giving Republicans so much to attack that their attacks, no matter how well reasoned, sound like partisan noise.
Well, I think a couple things maybe that the Biden administration has realized, and one is regarding the Republican attacks. I think that they have seen the writing on the wall that regardless of what they do, the Republican attacks are going to come. I know, and it's kind of interesting because Joe Biden on the campaign trail talked a lot about wanting to be bipartisan and he'll work with Republicans wherever he can. But I suspect that somewhere along the line, it's whether the light bulb went off with Joe Biden himself or whether his the people around him kind of convinced him that we're not going to get that help very often, so let's just do what we feel that we need to do and not worry about whether we get Republicans to praise us for doing it. And then the other thing is, I think that they have made the calculation of, as you said, going big and in some respects kind of opening up the fire hose. That was one of the things that Democrats said that maybe they learned out of the Obama administration. I read about a lot of Democrats saying there was regret that he didn't go bigger with some of his programs early in his tenure, and also that voters actually maybe don't seem to care as much about the price tag for stuff as maybe we all have thought in the past. I think there has been hesitance in the past, especially on the part of Democrats sometimes, to maybe be careful about some plans or proposals or whatever it may be for worry of sticker shock. And I think elected officials at the federal level are learning that maybe they don't really have to worry about that. Republicans went through with a huge tax plan during the Donald Trump term that was very expensive and added to the debt, which Republicans used to care about. All of a sudden, do again now that they're out of power, and they didn't get punished for that in any way. And I think the Biden administration is saying, look, we've got some things we want to do, and we're not going to worry about the price tag because people don't actually care.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, Republicans are really complaining about lack of bipartisanship, but they don't seem to be showing signs that they want to be bipartisan. We're at that point where, sure, I want to be bipartisan as long as you accept whatever I'm offering.
Right.
Bipartisanship doesn't include compromise, which seems, like
it
essential ingredient.
It definitely feels like to Republicans in Congress right now, bipartisanship means waiting for Democrats to propose conservative legislation, not waiting for both parties to come to the middle on something.
Right. And I think the other point you made about the price tag is interesting, that everything the Biden administration is proposing, someone else is going to pay for. Rich people, corporations, which it's sort of an easy case to make when you look at you see the stories of Jeff Bezos or people like that who aren't paying taxes, or Amazon isn't paying taxes, and it's us little people look at that and say, well, like, yeah, they can pay for free childcare, they can pay for $1 trillion infrastructure programs, let them pay for it. And the Biden administration this week announced they want, what is it, like $80 million to go to beef up IRS enforcement. They figure they can gain something like, I don't know, 800 million by better enforcement of tax rules. So, it's the old thing. As long as I don't have to pay for it, sure, I'll go along with it. I mean, there are folks that would tell you that there's trickle down on taxes too. That if we tax corporations, somewhere down the line. But as far as selling those programs, it seems to be effective because his programs seem to be pretty popular at this point. Biden seems to be concerned about history, how history will judge him. And Amie, last week you talked about how maybe he knows he's going to be a one-term president, or he's sort of preparing for that eventuality, and that's one reason why he's pushing everything so fast in hopes of getting something accomplished in his time in office. Or could it be that he's looking ahead and he says there's a possibility, or some people would say a probability, that he'll have to work with the Republican House after the 2020 election?
I mean, it could definitely be both. And it's a good strategy either way. I think there's a third strategy, and that strategy is obviously we're interested in the political cycles and how they turn over. But one thing that really hasn't happened in our recent memory is a giant pandemic that decimated the economy. And so a lot of these programs are also trying to just build that back up, just to return sort of a normalcy among people, because Biden's banking on that normalcy being good for the Democrats and for the person in power, which is him. Also, I think he's really trying to reach out to that working class coalition that has shifted to the Trump side. If you're providing them with free childcare, schooling that starts earlier, schooling that goes later into community college, you can really start to bring this coalition back. I mean, the Democrats were so used to being the party of unions, and then unions were decimated, and they sort of floundered for a number of years. Now I think you're really seeing the tide turn where they're saying, hey, maybe these progressive policies, if couched in a working class, ideology, can really turn the tide for Democrats and back to that sort of working class coalition that they want and they crave. So I think whether he runs or not, I think it really is going to do well for the party. And that's sort of always been Biden's thing.
Right. And most of his plans involve jobs, which also appeals to working class Americans. And I mean, the old idea of working class Americans being, a guy going out and doing a job and the wife staying home and raising kids, that's not reality anymore. So there is much more demand for things like childcare and pre-K and all those things. So I think you're right. He's making an appeal to that segment of society that, to a larger degree, stuck with Trump in 2020, but maybe in 2022 and 2024 will, look at things differently, especially if the economy rebounds, if there are jobs and some of these programs actually get enacted.
I think he really is betting on that. If he has to get these through, otherwise the public is going to look at him and be like, what have you done for me? And vote for Republicans.
And it also, he really doesn't have that much time. I remember 4 years ago, Chuck Grassley saying that President Trump had about a year to get things going, get things done, because once the calendar flips over to 2018, it was the election season. And the same thing is going to happen as soon as we get into 2022. It's going to be an election year, and that's going to change everything. So I think there really is a pressure on Biden and Democrats in Congress to get some of these programs rolling.
Absolutely.
And As I mentioned, Erin, Biden's approval rating is over 50%, 53, 54, 55 in there, higher on specific issues. Is it him, or does Biden benefit from uh, not being Trump and the feeling that the coronavirus pandemic is ending and the economy is recovering, that he's just in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, I think you've probably got. We're probably looking at a mixture of all those things you just talked about there. Um, I'm sure there's a little bit of a post-Trump bump there. Obviously Trump still has a lot of people who support him, and the Republicans were willing to stick with him. But when you talk about those that ever shrinking slice of the pie that is still out there, that will swing back and forth between parties. Clearly, a good segment of those are okay with the job that Joe Biden's doing. Yeah, the pandemic is obviously becoming under control. Life's looking more and more like it used to as time goes on, and that's that's going to help that sentiment. You mentioned the economy. People are getting back to work. So yeah, it's part of its circumstances, but part of it is what he's been doing too. I'm sure as you mentioned, Jim, some of the things that he's introduced are popular with the public. His pandemic relief package has been popular. This next round that's coming out with the child tax credit expansion, that's a popular idea. So he's been doing some things that are popular with the public as well. And he hasn't had that big crisis yet that maybe stunts a president's approval rating.
Mm-hmm.
That could still come. It usually does. I guess we'll see how bad things get on the immigration front with what's happening at the southern border. But as of now, that hasn't seemed to have taken a toll on his approval numbers. Maybe that does eventually. Maybe it's something else. But for now, it's been a as much as there is such a thing anymore in our partisan climate, that it's the honeymoon period is kind of hung on for Joe Biden for now.
Yeah.
But what happens if there's a fourth or fifth, I'm losing count, fifth wave of COVID-19? If things really fall apart in Afghanistan when we pull troops out, or some surprise that we aren't expecting? Amie, if downtown Waterloo still has more empty storefronts and unfilled offices than it did, pre-pandemic, does that put a damper on the era of good feeling? And even if the bigger economy gets going, as it appears to be, but I mean, if the local economy still looks kind of wobbly,
does that affect him?
Yeah,
maybe not. Downtowns have been emptying out, obviously, in places like Iowa for a long time. I think even if you get a fourth or fifth wave, unless it really starts affecting vaccinated people, we've got as a state like over a third of people vaccinated, which is amazing. And a lot of people have had their first vaccinations already, and more will have it in a couple weeks. So I'm hoping that these variants aren't vaccine killers and will stay away from us. And I think Biden's hoping that too. That's why he's trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible. You're seeing what's happening in places like India and Brazil, and just this devastation of these variants. So, if that happens, you really will see a tide turn. If the vaccine's not gonna work anymore and we have to go back to the way it was, and then people are really gonna be mad because they're gonna know how that was at the first. Trump got a little bit of a pass. Nobody knew it was going to happen. Obviously you can argue that was a factor in the election. There were other factors, but I think you're right too, James, that if he gets hammered on the border, and that actually works. And Erin was talking about, how it hasn't so far, but Republicans are really still hammering it. Ashley Hinson mentions it every time, she has a press call. So I think it's really an issue that he does have to eventually tackle. I think he's trying to with Kamala Harris, and sort of assigning her to the, Central America beat if you will. But I think, if he gets these programs passed and the coronavirus does not mutate in such a way that it affects vaccinated people, I think he's going to be in the clear for a little bit. But this is Biden. This is gaff Biden. I mean, he could make something happen to himself. But at the same time, are we really going to look at a Biden gaff and say that it's any worse than a Trump gaff? That is an unknown. I think Democrats are going to give him a wide berth on that.
Yeah, and I think the public will too. I mean, for one thing, he's more likable than Donald Trump. Number two, he doesn't insult people on a daily, hourly basis like Donald Trump did.
That we know about.
Yeah. So I think I think the public will give him cut him a lot more slack if things don't go as well as he's hoping. I guess maybe the first real test will come in 2022, which leads us right into our second segment here about the Census Says. The long-awaited census numbers came out this week, and as expected, Iowa's population numbers remained high enough that we will retain our 4 congressional districts. Texas will gain 2, and 5 other states in the South and West pick up an additional House seat. 7 states, mostly from the Northeast and Midwest, each lose a seat. At first glance, this would seem like good news for Republicans who largely control those states where former President Donald Trump did well. Take places like Texas, for example. It's important to remember that the number of House seats a state has determines its electoral college clout. States losing representation, California, New York, Illinois, are blue states. Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania are more of a mixed bag, swing states perhaps. So Erin, does this bode well for a second Trump presidency?
I mean, it'll be interesting. It's anytime you have, again, as I talked about the ever shrinking slice of the electorate that's considered in the swing vote category anymore. There's also an ever shrinking number of states that are true toss-ups in presidential elections anymore. So anytime that that needle can be moved even a little bit, it's worth paying attention to. And as we talked about the House races next year, the race for control of the House is expected to be very close. So any way that affects that could be significant. So it's interesting. I don't know that it's anything we can necessarily put our thumb on it at this moment, but it's obviously something we'll all be watching closely, starting with next year's midterms, to see if anybody came out of this a little better. And as for the reasons you laid out, if anything, it does seem like maybe it was good news for Republicans. We'll see if that turns out to be the case.
The I guess you'd call it the 30,000 foot view of population numbers suggests that even in red states where the fastest growth is happening, the fastest growth there is in blue areas, Austin, Texas, for example, the Research Triangle of North Carolina. So, and there's also a share of this growth in those states that is fueled by blue state residents moving to warmer climates where the economy is better. So, Amie, if you look at Iowa, does the same hold true here for 2022, that it might be a turnaround year for Democrats to make gains as population in blue counties such as Polk, Scott, Lynn, Blackhawk, which vote Democratic, that population increases while rural Iowa continues to lose population. If, for example, Representative Ashley Hinson is in a new district with Lynn, Blackhawk, and Dubuque, but loses some rural counties to, say, the 4th district, does a Democratic challenger, Amie Finkenauer perhaps, have a chance to make her a one-termer?
I don't know. So if you're looking at, sort of the way that Iowa's gone red, it's sort of all of these disparate blue counties just disappearing. And you're really down to what you said, Polk, Scott, Blackhawk, a couple other ones, Woodbury. But at the same time, obviously it's not county by county, it's district, and it's population and how many voters. So I think it's always been swingy in the first. I mean, since ever. Um, Ashley Hinson held on to it this time. Abby Finkenauer took it from Rod Blum last time. I would try to make a prediction, but I would be massively wrong, basically. I just would have no idea. Even if you're seeing gains in these metro counties, they're not big gains. I mean, overall, Iowa's population isn't growing that much, 4.5% maybe. And I don't necessarily think that there's a ton of gains in the first district. I would venture to guess that more of them are Des Moines. You're going to see a lot in the Cedar Rapids area too. But I think ultimately, if they really want to get the gains back, it's really going to depend on motivating these voters, because I really think the district is like half and half. So if you're going to motivate them one way or the other way, you really have to start that groundwork now. I think as much as people hate ongoing elections, like Democrats really need to hammer the district pretty hard and start hammering, Ashley Hinson pretty hard if they think they want to have a shot, or in these other districts where they think they have a shot. I think Marionette Miller Meeks is a good candidate for that as well. Obviously, she only won by 6 votes or something like that. Yes, so it's very they're very close. I think Democrats would be good to try to motivate people in the district to win back a couple of these seats.
Of course, none of that will matter if the Democratic conspiracy theories that GOP will gerrymander the redistricting process comes true. But Erin, I think it raises the question about legislative districts and control of the Iowa legislature. If the growth is in these blue counties, and if you think about Lynn, Polk, Blackhawk, Woodbury, Dallas County, Scott County, it seems possible maybe they pick up at least a Senate district in each of those areas. Polk County might even pick up a couple. Starting out, you would say the odds are those are going to be Democratic seats. So I mean, in 2022, we could see some change in both the House and Senate, possibly. I mean, if you think about 6 or 7 new urban districts, 12 House seats, it could put the House in play too, couldn't it?
Boy, potentially. The only reason I hesitate is 59 to 41 is a
big hill to climb.
Yeah, and it's even bigger in the Senate. Now that said, we don't know what the maps will look like, and maybe it is, and it would take a combination. They're not going to get 9 good new solid Democratic districts. It'd have to be a combination of maybe a few districts swinging their way, and then a few toss-up districts go their way in the election. So if you get a confluence of factors like that, then maybe the House becomes in play again. And that's what's kind of interesting about all this, is just the unknowns and what the maps are going to look like, and then what the electorate's going to look like. I mean, that's the other thing. Regardless of what the maps look like coming out of redistricting, we don't know exactly what the voters are going to look like, in this first midterm after presidential election, Donald Trump not on the ballot, all these factors that, we don't know exactly who's going to turn out and how they're going to vote. So it's just, at the very least, it's going to be really interesting for those of us who kind of do this, take this in on a daily basis. This whole next year and year and a half or so is going to be really interesting.
And the other thing that is worth mentioning is that whenever you have redistricting every 10 years, it sort of creates its own turmoil that, legislators get thrown into the same district. So maybe either they move or somebody retires. It creates new opportunities for challengers. It's really sort of anything goes almost in that first election after redistricting. It's not uncommon to see significant turnover, significant change in the legislature in that first election after redistricting. And so and we never really know how much impact that's going to have until the election. But as we get more census numbers and as the redistricting process proceeds, I'm sure we'll have more to discuss in future editions of On Iowa Politics. If you enjoy the podcast, tell a friend and subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. Send your fan mail to podcast@thegazette.com. You can find us on the homepages of the Quad City Times, Sioux City Journal, Muscatine Journal, Mason City Globe Gazette, Waterloo-Cedar Falls Courier, and the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Surf Zombies will take us out. If you know an Iowa band or musician who should be on our show, send us a sound file and subscribe to On Iowa Politics. For Erin, Amie, and our producer, Stephen, I'm James Lynch. Thanks for listening. Stay well.